Hi boys and girls, this is Mrs. Duff. So in these videos that I'll be doing each week, I will be providing a little bit of extra help. If after watching Mrs. Lavelle's math video, you're still a little bit confused or you just want to see a couple more problems done, these are the videos to check out for that extra help. So this week, Mrs. Lavelle has gone over 3 lessons for our new geometry unit. So we have our first lesson for drawing points, lines, and rays. So we are going to just look through a few of the examples that Mrs. Lavelle did not do. All right, so Mrs. Lavelle already went over our guided practice questions, number 1, 2, and 3, to identify line segment QR, line FB, and ray AC. Okay, so if you look very closely at example number 4, I see that there's an arrow facing this direction and an arrow pointing the opposite direction, and our 2 points, D and F. So I can tell, because of those 2 arrows pointing outward, that that is a line. So I'm going to write my 2 letters. On my figure, they are capitals, so I'm going to copy that. And then I'm going to draw my line above with the 2 arrows pointing in either direction. If we take a look at the next page, okay, this is the same activity that we just did in the guided practice. Okay, down at the bottom it's a little different, and Mrs. Lavelle already did examples 9 and 11 for drawing each figure. Now, Mrs. Lavelle and I aren't doing our videos together, but I'm sure she mentioned that if you have a straight edge, I happen to have a protractor here, which we'll be learning about later in our unit. That's a great tool to use when drawing lines. You could also use a ruler, but the flat edge here is a ruler. So I'm going to take a look here, and I see on number 13. Let's look at that one. Now I notice in the symbol above that, it has 2 arrows, and I know that that means it's a line. So I'm going to go ahead and draw a nice line using my straight edge. If you don't have a straight edge, that's fine. You can just kind of freehand it, which I did on the other examples. I'm going to add my 2 arrows, and then I'm going to put a point for S and a point for N. Okay, so you can finish up examples 10, 12, and 14. Oh, my marker just flew off the table. If I turn the page, we have a little bit more drawing on the top for drawing each figure. How many line segments are represented in the figure? So you can trace that with your finger or with a pencil and count how many line segments and how many points there are. You can practice with your vocabulary here, reading each sentence and choosing the word that best fits. And which way is the correct way to represent the figure to the right? So give those a try. And I have a little trick to show you in just a moment. All right, boys and girls. So if we were in class during this lesson, we would probably have you stand up and do a little bit of movement to get these vocabulary words set in your mind. Okay, so with the first word, point, we're going to represent that with just a fist, okay? The next word, line segment, we have 2 end points. Now, if I stretch my arms out all the way, you can't see my hands, so I'm going to squish them in so you make a line segment with 2 end points. The next word, ray, has 1 end point and 1 arrow. Now, that could go this way, or it could go the opposite way. Both directions are correct for the arrow, as long as it's 1 endpoint and 1 arrow. The last vocabulary word is a line that has 2 arrows pointing in opposite directions because it goes on and on. Okay, So you can kind of do this like charades or Simon Says, but I'm going to call out a few of the words and try to make the motion that goes along with it. So if I said line, what would you do? Okay, I hope you just did 2 arrows. If I said point, what would you do? Point. What about a line segment? I did it too fast. I didn't even give you a chance to try on that one. What about ray? Give that one a try. Okay. Endpoint, arrow. All right, let's do line segment again. All right, hope you had your 2 endpoints. So that's a little game you can play just to practice this vocabulary as you're working on this lesson. So I'm going to pause the video here because next I will be moving on to lesson 2. All right, so lesson 2 is all about drawing parallel and perpendicular lines and also intersecting lines. Okay, so we're actually going to start off this lesson with a video, and it is one of my favorite math videos of the entire school year, so I hope you enjoy it.
That are perpendicular on a rectangle's perimeter. Or let's break it down even simpler. They make right angles in particular. Parallel lines never meet. Intersecting lines make these. Perpendicular lines meet at 90 degrees. Put your hands in the air with me. Parallel, intersecting, perpendicular, they're rectangular. Now let's talk about detecting if 2 lines are intersecting. It's the term that we select if at any point 2 lines connect. Parallel lines never meet. Intersecting lines make these. Perpendicular lines meet at 90 degrees. Put your hands in the air with me. Parallel, intersecting, perpendicular, they're rectangular. Will never touch, then you can tell that those 2 lines are parallel, like these telephone wires up above the street. Parallel lines will never meet. Parallel lines never meet. Intersecting lines make these. Perpendicular lines meet at 90 degrees. Put your hands in the air with me. Parallel, intersecting, perpendicular, they're rectangular.
All right, didn't you love that video? I think that tune is just so catchy. And to get up and do the motions with the robot is super fun. But the 3 main vocabulary words of this lesson are parallel, perpendicular, and intersecting. So one little trick that I always have in mind during this lesson is sometimes these P words can get a little confusing, parallel versus perpendicular. So I love how the word kind of has a built-in clue for us, because in parallel we have these 2 L's here that are parallel. Okay, if they were to stretch on and on, they would never cross, they would never intersect or be perpendicular. So parallel kind of has that little hint in the word with how it's spelled, which is great. So if we take a look at the lesson for today, down in the guided practice, it says describe the line segments outlined in the tennis racket. So if you take a look, they've got a couple lines kind of highlighted there with a darker line. And I can tell if I were to stretch those out. Okay, see if I can get this on the board. Okay, if I were to make those lines longer, you don't have to, but if I were to, they would never cross. Okay, two lines that are never going to cross, that's going to be parallel. So I'm going to go ahead and very carefully spell it. The words are written up here for you and in the key concept area. Okay, but I have them on the board. Parallel. Okay, on the next page, okay, Mrs. Lavelle did number 2 already in her video. You're going to take a look at number 3 and identify those lines and their relationship to each other. Okay, for 4, 5, 6, and 7, you're drawing examples of those. So intersecting, remember, those should not form a 90-degree angle. Those should form V's. So like in the video, it said intersecting lines form V's. So they can be any which way. They could be like this. They could be pretty tight. Okay. Or they might be a little bit wider. Okay, but you can kind of see the V's there. Okay, it doesn't make a square angle. Okay, and they have specific letters to label your lines with. And then this fancy symbol here, which you saw an example for, means parallel. So those two lines are going to be parallel. Number 8, circle the statement that is true about the figure below. So it says the statement. So that just means there will be one that's true. So you have to really carefully read these 4 options. And I always like to trace with my finger to see if it's true. So if I were to look at that very first example, it says line AB, all right, AB, is parallel to ray EF. Well, EF is here. My lines, is that parallel? No, they're going to hit each other. So I know that it is not that one. So I'm going to put just a little X by it because I've tried it and I know that's not true. So go through, try the rest of those to find the one that is true. Okay. Then on your final page, there's a couple more examples where you have to draw. Okay. Take a look. It's kind of hard to see on those blinds. And it says Martin is washing windows. First, he must raise the blinds. Describe the kind of line segments formed by the horizontal blinds. Okay, and you can kind of see what vocabulary word would you use to describe those. Okay. We have some matching here to match the vocabulary word with the picture and to see which way is the correct description for this figure. If you notice, there's a little square box there. That means there's a 90-degree angle. So just a little hint for you there. Okay. So that's my mini lesson, a little extra help practice for lesson 2. In just a moment, we'll start with lesson 3. So if you need to, you can pause here and finish up that lesson's work. All right, boys and girls, ready for lesson 3. So we have our hands-on modeling angles. And this lesson talks about how an angle is made up of an end point and 2 rays. Okay, and I added this little kind of arc in there just to show that this is the angle that I'm talking about. In this lesson, it talks about the different turns of angles. It talks about the quarter turn, the half turn, and a full turn. You can see how they have the little red mark showing that's the quarter turn. That top part is their half turn, and this full turn is the whole circle. So when I think of angles and these turns, I often think of a clock. Now I just was trying to find a clock to use for this lesson, and I realized a lot of what I have is now digital. And I didn't grab one from my classroom at school, so I made one. So if you look at this fake clock, we measure time with the different angles, okay? So we have 12 o'clock, okay, 3, 6, 9, and a quarter turn is like 1/4 of that clock. Half of the clock, and then the full would be the full 12 hours passing. So just one way to think of the turns of the angle is to picture a clock in your head. So when you are looking at our practice sheet, okay, it might be a little bit easier to visualize. Just think about it's a clock without any numbers on it, okay? So I'm gonna hang this up and zoom us in. All right, we're all zoomed in here. So the first example that Mrs. Lavelle did with you was to draw an angle with a measure less than a 1/4 of a turn or a quarter turn. So I just drew one for myself and I made sure to put the little mark to show that's the angle that I want you to see, okay? So if we're gonna draw an angle with a measure greater than 1/4, I'm just gonna start up here with my first ray. Then I'm gonna picture in my head and kind of write with my finger. Well, right here, if I were to go a straight ray, right there, that would be 1/4. And I want it to be greater, so I want it to be bigger. So I'm gonna keep pulling down. And I'm gonna avoid the half mark, because it didn't say anything about a 1/2 turn, okay? And I wanna make sure that we look at that side of the angle. That's the angle that is greater than 1/4 turn, okay? So as we move down, okay, there are some pictures here. It says draw lines to match each figure with its description. So we just have to read each one of these and match it with the picture. So I'll read the first one. It says, an angle with a measure greater than 1/4 turn, but less than 1/2 turn. I'm going to look here. I see this looks like exactly 1/4 turn. That one looks like exactly a half. That one is definitely not greater than a 1/4. Oh, but this one looks like it's greater than a 1/4. Okay, a 1/4 would be like that. And it also looks like it's less than a half. So I can go ahead and draw my line. Okay, so you're going to go through, read the rest of these, and match them to their appropriate picture. Okay, and my homework, it has a little bit more explanation up there for you. Okay, if you look at the pictures, you're going to decide which is the correct description to go with each angle. And on the back here, okay, for numbers 4, 5, 6, and 7, you are again drawing those turns or those angles. So kind of think of the clock and draw your 2 rays to make your pictures. Okay. On our problem solving, got first one, number 8. Describe the rays of an angle that measure 1/2 turn. You can even turn back and look at the examples. So I see a 1/2 turn right here. How could you describe those rays? How do they kind of sit, and what other geometric line do they make? Okay. And then number 9 asks you to imagine a clock with hour hands at 12 and a minute hand at 2. Does the angle formed by the 2 hands have a measure greater than, less than, or equal to 1/4 turn? So I have my little clock here. Okay. I'm going to zoom out again. Okay, and remember, an hour hand is shorter. So if I write the word minute, and I write the word hour, okay, the minute hand is longer, the hour hand is shorter, it points to the hour. Okay, but if the hour hand is at 12, and the minute hand is at 2, I'm not going to draw it because I don't want to do all the work for you. Okay. Is that angle greater than, less than, or equal to 1/4 turn? You could even draw a mini clock here if you want, or you could draw it on a separate sheet of paper if you want to figure out what that angle would look like. And then in your own words, define angle. So you can look back at the front. Okay, remember the parts that make up an angle. Kind of put that in your own words. What is an angle? All right, boys and girls, I hope that helped with our 3 math lessons this week, and I'll see you again next week.